Good evening, everyone. Welcome back to Bible Lanes and Customs. I hope everyone enjoyed the week off. I know it came at a perfect time for me as my family and I were traveling, but I'm excited for tonight's class, and we're back at it and back into the swing of things. Again, for those of you that have already turned in your last homework assignment, I appreciate that. I'm debating still whether or not we'll have a homework assignment for this lesson, but it is possible, and as always, I will post that in our Facebook group chat if I decide to do one. I've been thinking about some things, but I'm not sure if it will be something that I want you guys to do or not. So tonight we are on chapter 11 in our workbooks. Page number 45, and we are talking about the birth and care of children. Last week we talked about the role of the mother and the father within the family, and so now we're going to talk about the kids. Now, Jewish wives back in this day all had a deep desire, obviously, for the joy of being able to birth their own children. In Genesis chapter 30, verse 1, Rachel says to Jacob, "Give me children or else I die." That's pretty intense. She had a strong desire to have babies. And Adam and Eve were instructed by God to be fruitful and multiply. This was found in Genesis 1 and 28. God also made a promise unto Abraham in Genesis 13 and 6, and he said, "I will make thy seed as the dust of the earth." In other words, you will have more children than you are even able to count. Now, this wasn't obviously literal children, but figurative, speaking of the people that he would rule over. Now, according to God's law, the children were taught that having children was taught as a sign of a blessing. So if you were able to have children, that was considered a blessing from the Lord. In Deuteronomy 28 and 4, "Blessed shall be the fruit of thy body." And then in Psalms 128 and 3, "Thy wife shall be as a fruitful vine by the sides of thine house." Now, sterility, or the lack of being able to have children within marriage, was considered a divine visitation or judgment or curse upon the couple or either of the spouses within that relationship. 1 Samuel 1 and 6 said that Hannah's barrenness was because the Lord had shut up her womb. We also know that Hannah was so desperate to have children that she went to the temple and prayed fervently, to the point that Samuel thought that, Eli thought she was drunk. She thought that, man, this woman is so desperate for a child, she looks like she's not even sober anymore. And then we also know that God eventually did open up the womb of Hannah, and she gave birth to Samuel. In Luke 1:25, having a child after being barren a long time meant that the Lord had taken away her reproach among men. So if you were able to bear children after not being able to, it was a sign or signified that that reproach or that rebuke or judgment had been lifted from you. Now, for those of us that are mothers, we just want healthy babies, right? There's not necessarily a strong preference for boys and girls, but in Jewish tradition, the custom was there was always a desire for a male heir or a male child. And this was because there was a blessing that came with having a son. And that is, so you can see that there in your notes, "May the blessings of Allah be upon thee. May your shadow never grow less, and may all your children be boys and no girls." That's pretty strong blessing to wish upon somebody, that you're only going to have boys and no girls. So the boys were preferred because they increase the size or wealth and importance of that family group or clan. And the reason why is because the boys would eventually bring home their wives and children into the father's house. So if, you had a boy, you were pretty safe to say that that would be enlarged. The girls, however, would decrease the house size, as ultimately they would end up leaving the father's house in order to be with their husbands. So the boys were preferred because it added not only numerically to that father's house, but it also gave him, kind of expanded his authority over more people within his home. So the Hebrew women especially preferred boys at this time because they had all had this hope that their son would be the Messiah. This can be found in Genesis 49 and 10 and Numbers 24 and 17 regarding the scepter not departing from Judah and a scepter rising up out of Israel. This is a reference to the Messiah. So the care of the infants. Now, obviously, the women primarily were the caregivers, but the babies were not left to move about freely. And you all have heard this reference and taught about many different times, especially this time of year coming up with Christmas, that the babe Jesus was wrapped in swaddling clothes. They were wrapped tightly from the top to the bottom. And so when they were at birth, they were washed. They were rubbed down in salt, which I'm assuming is to help absorb some of the extra moisture from delivery. And then they would be wrapped in linen or cotton bandages, which were 4 and 5 inches wide and 5 to 6 yards long. So it was a great big long piece of fabric that they used to tightly wrap this baby in order to keep it feeling safe and confined. And, you know, as a mom, I know for myself, when my babies were very, very small, that they tended to really prefer that tight wrapping of the clothing, and it was a sign of comfort. It gave them peace. They didn't feel constricted, but they felt like they were being held tightly and hugged, just probably like they felt in the womb. So the Jewish rites concerning children, the Jewish boys were circumcised 8 days after birth, and the words that were spoken, you can read this along in your workbooks, page 46. Blessed by the Lord our God, who has sacrificed us by his precepts and given us circumcision. And the Father would then say, who has sanctified us by his precepts and has granted us to introduce our child into the covenant of Abraham, our father. So this was not only a sign of, you know, belonging to God, but it was a sign of being under Abraham as the leader. Remember last week we talked about the hierarchy of authority and stuff. So this referenced the authority that Abraham had over not only his own family, but those clans or tribes that were within that group of people. God had changed the names of Abraham and Sarah when he gave them the law of circumcision. Therefore, the boy was named on the 8th day, the day that he was circumcised. And then usually after a circumcision, there would be a family meal. And this circumcision, this rite of circumcision, was the sign of the Abrahamic covenant. So in Genesis 17:10, we read, "This is my covenant, which ye shall keep between me and you, and thy seed after thee." Luke 2:21, Jesus was circumcised on the 8th day, and he was also named that same day. Now, after childbirth, there was a purification process, and this lasted 7 days for a boy and 14 days for a girl. She would then remain home for additional 33 days, this is referencing the mother, for a boy, and 66 days for a girl. After this time had passed, she would go back to the temple and she would offer a sacrifice. If she was rich, she might offer a lamb. But if she was poor, she would be allowed to offer up 2 young or 2 turtle doves. And this is according to Luke 2:21 and Leviticus chapter 12. So the naming of children. Now, this is a pretty cool part of this lesson. I really enjoyed this, and I kind of took a little rabbit trail on this myself just because it was so interesting. So the naming of children. Jewish families were very fond of compounding the name of Allah into their children's given names. For instance, you can see under that title, naming of children, Abijah, that means whose father is God. Ahaziah, held by Jehovah. Azariah, helped by Jehovah. Obadiah, servant of Jehovah. Daniel, God is my judge. Elijah, my God is Jehovah. Elkanah, whom God created. And Ezekiel, God will strengthen. So all of these names had some form of the name of Allah, God, at that time. So after the birth of the first son, the father and mother were known as the father of so-and-so. So my husband, Trent, and I are the father and mother of John because he's our firstborn son. And the son added to the father's, the son's name was added to the father's first name after his own. So for instance, John would be John Bar Trent because he would be John, the son of Trent. And anytime we would be in public or we're introducing ourselves, we would say, I am Trent, or John is the son of Trent, anytime he would introduce himself, rather. So Jesus refers to Peter as Simon Bar Jonah, or Simon, the son of Jonah, in Matthew 16 and 17. Now, some of the names had a double meaning, such as Thomas. Thomas, which is called Didymus, and both names mean twin. Thomas is the Aramaic version of that name, and Didymus is the Greek version. Girls' names were much, much different and usually were taken from beautiful objects in nature or pleasant graces or of character. For instance, there at the bottom of page 46, you can read that Jemima was a dove, means dove. Tabitha or Dorcas is gazelle, and I suppose that means that she was very athletic and graceful. Rhoda was a rose. Rachel was a lamb. Salome was peace. Deborah is bee, and Esther was a star. So those were the types of names that they would use for girls' names. It wasn't necessarily any relation to the mother's name or even the father's name at that time. So interestingly enough, I was curious, is there a Hebrew version of my name? And so I got out Google, and sure enough, there is. So Amber, A-M-B-E-R, in Hebrew is Inbar, I-N-B-A-R. And it is from the Arabic Ambar, A-M-B-A-R, meaning jewel. So my name means jewel. And there is the reference of amber, although not a name in the Bible, in Ezekiel 8 and 2. Then I beheld, and lo, a likeness as the appearance of fire, from the appearance of his loins, even downward fire, and from his loins even upward, as the appearance of brightness, as the color of amber. Now, amber-colored fire was like this gold, yellow gold type of color to it. So in Hebrew, amber-colored fire is the chasmal, and this references a metal, but not a fossil resin. So it is a metal resin. It is a compound of silver and gold and was a much prized antiquity. So that being said, if you are able, and it won't work necessarily for every name, but you might be able to chase your own little rabbit hole with this and see if you can't find your own Hebrew version of your name in the Bible or reference somewhere. You can use Google to figure it out. It's just kind of interesting. You can find out, you know, the history of it, and maybe you'll be surprised and find out something cool like your name means jewel or something else that's equally pleasing. So the training of children. Now, obviously, the mother was very, very involved in this, and she did most of the training in the early years of the children when they're very young. Proverbs 31:1 says, the words of King Lemuel, the prophecy that his mother taught him. 2 Timothy 3:15, Paul said of Timothy, from a child thou hast known the holy scriptures. And in 2 Timothy 1:5, just previously, Paul refers to the faith of Timothy's mother and grandmother. So while the young children were taught by the mothers, the daughters specifically remained under the guidance of their mother until marriage. Now the sons, as they got older, would be taught more by their fathers, although they would never really get away from the teaching of their mothers. So they would get more of their instruction on work or anything that involved labor, you know, obviously from their dads, but there was still a lot of connection to the sons with their mothers, even until they got to be older and moved out. Or, you know, started their own families, rather. So Proverbs 1:8 says, my son, hear the instruction of thy father. Proverbs 6:20, my son, keep thy father's commandment. Now, only well-to-do families could afford tutors for their sons. So anytime that there was education or any kind of instruction, it would primarily be done by the mother and father. They homeschooled from the very beginning. And so that's why a lot of the importance was put on the Jewish traditions, customs, their learning about the Messiah, the learning about the religious rites and practices. All of that began in the home, and for the most part was primarily the types of things that they were learning. And even in their daily lives, like we've studied in previous lessons, things about the way they eat, the way they housed themselves, and different things all had some kind of connection towards their religious preferences and customs and traditions. So that is it for this lesson. It was a very short lesson this week. I believe I will have you guys turn in your Hebrew name if you can find it. And if you're maybe not your first name and middle name, or I don't know, maybe even your last name, if you can find a Hebrew version of it, I'd just be interested in seeing what you guys are able to find out what meaning that is and what significance that might have for you. And that will be our homework, and I will make sure to get that added to our Facebook group chat. And you guys have a great evening. I hope you all enjoyed this. It's good to be back, and you guys have a fantastic week. I hope you have a great day, and y'all take care. Love y'all. Bye-bye.